Sisters and brothers, please welcome your SEIU Local 2015 officer, Arnulfo de la Cruz, and from Tulare County, Eva Bruce.
Arnulfo, did you know that climate change is directly connected to both our states' severe drought and increased wildfires? Today, our season is more than 2 months longer than it was in the 1970s. Our summers are hotter, our winters are drier, and being from Tulare County, it's really impacted our agricultural system there. The jobs have gone away, there's no water, our smart counties are running out of water.
That's right, Eva, and we know that this is an issue that impacts all of us in California. Whether it's those of you who live near Richmond in the oil refineries, whether it's the former chemicals that were left in the shipyards in Bayview Hunters Point in San Francisco, or the pesticides even in the Central Valley when I was growing up as a young boy, and I remember what that did to our water,
Yep.
or even the issue of smog in the LA area basin. And then most recently, I'm sure that we all know, and what's in the news, is the horrible injustice that's happening right now in Flint, Michigan. So these are the issues that are happening that impact our families throughout the state. And we know that there's something that we can do about it.
Yes.
So I'm really happy, Eva, that we have some great panelists with us today that I'd like to introduce. First, let's give a warm welcome to Brother Tom Steyer, the founder and president of Next Gen Climate. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Next, let's give a warm welcome to Dr. Manuel Pastor, the director of the USC Program for Environmental and Regional Equity. And our third panelist, Martha Dina Arguello, the Executive Director of Physicians for Social Responsibility. We'd like to welcome our panelists. Thank you so much for taking time out of your busy days to be here with SEIU 2015 members. Maybe each of you could take about 5 minutes to explain a little bit more about the work that you're doing in your organization. Brother Tom, can we start with you?
Sure. So I want to start by just saying thank you for having me. It's a great honor for me to be here, to see you. I know that you guys treat everybody with dignity and respect as part of your job. And I know that more than that, this union has been at the forefront of fighting for a decent wage. I know that you've been at the forefront of fighting for workers' rights. And I know that you've been in the forefront of fighting for the rights of the elderly and people with disabilities. I also know, as someone who's not a member of your union, that the leadership of your union, and I know there are a lot of people here, but in particular, Mary Kay and LaFonza, are absolutely visionary leaders for you guys, but for society as a whole. I think we should all give them a huge hand. So, the other thing you should know is we work around the United States on energy and climate and on justice issues in general, and our best partners are always organized labor, and the best partner within organized labor everywhere we go is the SEIU, without exception. So let me say this, we want simple things. We look at the United States, we want simple justice. We'd like people to have a living wage. We'd like people to be able to breathe clean air and clean water. And we'd like our kids to be able to have good public schools and affordable higher education. So this is at the heart of the California promise. This is at the heart of our American promise. And we all know that they don't exist throughout our society for everyone. And that's why we're pushing, and that's what we have to push for. But let me say this, if you know me at all, then you probably know me because I've worked for a long time on energy and climate issues. And you might wonder why I care about those, why you should care about those, and why they should be important to the SEIU. So let me say this. Energy and climate are human issues. I care about them because of the way that they impact people in California. So let's start about how that could be true. First is health. The fact of the matter is that over 3 million Californians have asthma. 7 out of 10 Californians live in zip codes that have unhealthy air. And within those statistics are a fact that people of color are much more likely to live in zip codes and areas where the air is unhealthy. Latinos are over 6 times more likely than white people to live with unhealthy air. African Americans are 5.8 times more likely. We cannot separate the fight for justice from the fight for racial justice. This is one big fight, and we actually have to do it together. So, 1 is health. 2 is jobs. Everybody from California knows what the drought has meant for us in terms of taking jobs away from workers. I think in 2015, the number was 21,000 jobs disappeared because of the drought. Yeah. But the other thing that's true is when we move to clean energy, we create thousands of jobs in our local communities. So if you think about the bill that was passed last year, it involved retrofitting over the next 15 years 600,000 buildings, commercial buildings in California. Those are going to be good paying jobs everywhere in California, and they're going to be for working people so that people can make enough money to have a family in dignity. So when we think about energy and climate, we're thinking about the human parts of it. And if you listen to the problem about Flint, Flint is not an anomaly in our society. If you're from California, go to the Central Valley, go to Richmond, go to the places and you will see bad air, you will see bad water, and you will see people who get sick as a result. If you live in West Fresno, you have a life expectancy that's more than 20 years less than the people in North Fresno 2 miles away. That's what we're talking about changing if we're actually going to have justice throughout our society. And let me say this. It's a fight. In none of the things are we doing is this just happening. The human beings in this state are in a fight, whether we know it or not. We are in a fight against organized corporations and economic interests that are trying to do what they want for the bottom line. And if we're going to win, we're David, they're Goliath. Goliath is big. Goliath is scary. For David to win, we have to be smarter, and we can do this. We can do it. In 2010, I co-chaired a proposition to fight the oil companies. In 2012, I co-chaired a proposition to get out-of-state companies to pay a fair share of income tax like every California company in California and sent it to fix up schools, which is hundreds of millions of bucks. But if we're going to do this, we have to both be organized and we have to be united. I'm talking to organized labor, a union. Those are the words that we have to be. We have to be organized and we have to stick together. So the men and women in this room have been at the fight, at the front of the fight for justice. I applaud you, I respect you, I am here to learn about you and so that we can work together. No one will solve our problems for us. We have to solve our own problems. And when I look at this year, and I look around the United States and I listen to the debates, I know that we are as much at risk as a society. The people in this room, I have never felt that the difference between the people I support and the people I oppose is as big as this year. I have never felt we're at risk the way we are at this year. So I feel as if this is our big risk, this is our big opportunity, And I don't think we do it unless we all stick together. So I would like to ask you guys to do me a favor. I want to be on your team. I don't believe we can win unless there's a coalition of people working together in California, making sure the people's voice is heard. So I want to put on the purple of the SEIU. And I want you guys to do me a favor. So I want you to repeat after me, because there's something that I do think really strongly. I believe.
I believe.
I believe that we.
I believe that we.
I believe that we will win.
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 Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Brother Tom. And we look forward to actually hearing shortly also questions that we have from our members. We're so glad that you could make it. Dr. Pastor, would you like to go next?
Actually, I probably don't want to go after that. Brother Tom be rocking. Let's give him a round of applause. So I'm happy to be here, happy to be with SEIU and union members. I was at a meeting the other day that began with an exercise where they said, what's something that your mother taught you that you hold dear for your entire life? It's a great question to think about. And I try to think about my mom, who grew up in Spanish Harlem and spoke Spanish with lots of chingados, right? Very fast and a little dirty. I was saying, what lesson could I take away? And the thing that leapt to my mind was something my mom taught me. You never cross a picket line. And she said that because she believed in unions, but it meant something even deeper, which is that you stand in solidarity with other people. And we need to stand in solidarity with the next generation of Californians who are going to inherit these climate and environmental problems unless we do something now. If you don't want to cross a picket line, you'd better protect that environment. We need the solidarity. Now, Tom is absolutely right that this is a problem for the entire generation of Californians and for the entire planet. But he's also right that it's something that deeply affects communities of color. When you look at the data in terms of who lives proximate to an emitting facility, who lives near freeways, who has their children at school affected by air pollution that actually impacts academic performance, it's African Americans, it's Latinos, it's Asians. And when people look at that data, they often think that maybe what explains it is just income, that it's something that it affects poor people, and because that affects people of color. But when you look at the data, even when you control for income, there's still a racially disparate pattern in terms of who is exposed. In fact, in the Bay Area, African Americans making more than $100,000 a year are more likely to live near a toxic facility than whites making $20,000 a year. So it's not just income. It's also race and political power, and you see it in places like Flint, which got ignored, and you see it in places like Porter Ranch, where there's been emergency treatment to deal with the problem up there. And we don't begrudge those folks getting decent environmental care. We just want to make sure that that's also in South LA, where there's also oil drilling, in Wilmington, where there are refineries, in Fresno, where there's all sorts of problems around air and water, et cetera. Environmental justice is good for everyone. Now, I want to say, I think one last thing and then leave most of this. Well, I guess two things. One is, I, as Marta knows, have been researching this for years. And when I first began researching environmental justice, I told my aunt, my tia Dalia, that I'd gotten a big grant to work on environmental justice. She said, "Ah, Manuelito, I'm so proud. What is environmental justice?" And I said to my tia, I said, "Tia, it's that, low-income communities, communities of color are more exposed to these hazards." And she looked at me, still a little bit proud, with a little bit of sadness. She said, "Ay, Manuelito, everyone knows that." So this is something we know, it's something communities know, and it's something that's reflected in an important piece of data that I really want to lift up right now. And it's the following. And this is a data trend that shows up last year, but it's been showing up for the last 6 or 7 years. When people imagine who an environmentalist is, they tend to imagine a well-off white person with spandex who just finished riding a bicycle, who eats granola, right? Spends all their time in the Sierras, etc. When the Public Policy Institute of California interviewed Californians and said, "Do you consider climate change a very serious threat to the future of California? One that you want to see addressed immediately, and one that you'd be willing to deal with economic consequences to make sure we deal with it?" Only 43% of non-Hispanic whites said they thought it was a very serious threat. Do you know what the number was for Latinos? 63%. 57% for African Americans and 54% for Asians. Why? Because those are the communities living with the consequences of air pollution. When you imagine environmentalist, it's not the Birkenstock-wearing person from the Bay Area, although they might be there. It's the immigrant woman in Wilmington who lives right next to a refinery, who knows the daily consequences of greenhouse gas emissions, climate change, and air pollution. So we have, as communities of color, as workers, as people interested in these issues, we have a dog in this fight. And when you look at the income breakdown too, which is fascinating, 61% of people who make less than $40,000 a year consider climate change a very serious problem. Only 45% of those who make $80,000 a year consider it a serious problem. Low income, communities of color have a direct interest in dealing with the issues of climate. This is our fight. This is our future. We look forward to working with you on making a better California for the economy and for the environment.
Thank you, Dr. Pastor. Sister Martha, would you like to go next?
Yes, I would. So Physicians for Social Responsibility is a membership organization of physicians and healthcare professionals. But we're also an organization that believes that partnering the powerful voice of impacted communities with the credible and science-based voice of physicians is one of the formulas for making change. And so they asked me today to come and talk to you about what are we doing to respond to our climate crisis. And from a health perspective, climate change is one of the gravest threats to public health that we face. And we face it at a global level, and we face it in our neighborhoods. And at the neighborhood level, that climate crisis is really the air pollution crisis. More people die in California because of our bad air than do in car crashes. But we ignore that at our peril. I want to know how long can you hold your breath? So imagine if we have to wait for Los Angeles to meet the clean air standards. That means more deaths. That means more hospital costs. And the environmental justice community has always known that we will be hit first and worst by climate change. But we also know that it is not just about climate change. When I was walking up the stairs, I heard about folks talking about pesticides in the Central Valley. So if we think about it, the major way we bring our food, the major way we produce our energy, and the major way we produce all the conveniences of modern life, all rest on fossil fuels. Petrochemicals, feedstocks come from fossil fuels. So our challenge is, how do we make a cancer-free economy? How do we make an economy that helps us go upstream to protect public health, so that your zip code should not determine your life expectancy, as it does now? Well, those of us in the environmental justice community know that it's done by standing together and being united and learning from our labor organizers. We're out, many organizations that we work with, the California Environmental Justice Alliance, Californians for Pesticide Reform, the Center for Race, Poverty, and the Environment, and I'm missing a whole bunch of organizations that are ready to stand with you to clean up our communities. Just down the street, there's an oil well, and residents in South LA have been living with the consequences of oil drilling for many years, and our complaints of bloody noses and children who had to be held up all night because they could not be laid down because they got bloody noses. For 2 years, actually 3 years, our complaints went unanswered. And when you look at the reaction to what's happening in Porter Ranch, which is catastrophic and horrible, and we shouldn't have to go through it, the response to that community and the response to the African American and Latino communities just south of here show the disproportionate impacts of pollution, but also unequal protection to those pollutants. That requires a response, and that response is us coming together, standing together, and working to keep oil in the ground, to create the new economy that does not say I have to choose between my job and my lungs, between my job and increasing cancer risk. That's what we're working for. In Los Angeles, we ask you to join Stand Together Against Neighborhood Drilling. We're also working with the folks at Porter Ranch, because the folks at Porter Ranch recognize that they get better treatment than we. And that's what solidarity and standing together looks like. Yeah? So we want you to stand with us, because we know to keep oil in the ground, create a just transition to a new economy, one that works for poor people, because the fossil fuel industry has not helped us make our way out of poverty. Okay? With all the jobs it creates, we are still locked in poverty. We are still locked in cities that do not sustain health. To get there, we'll do it together. I encourage you to go to the Stand LA website, join us. If you're in LA, we're going to have a big battle. If you're in the Central Valley, we're going to have a big battle to keep that oil in the ground and to stop using pesticides on agricultural fields. We've got things that are coming up this year. There's going to be a bill around supporting ag innovation zones so that we can begin to make our agriculture safer. We don't have to use pesticides. We can transition to organic farming just like we can transition to a clean energy economy. We can stop making things that are toxic when we use them and when we throw them away so that our soil is clean. And we're going to do that by standing together. Thank you, brothers and sisters. I'm waiting for you.
Thank you so much, Martha. And what we'd like to now do is ask the panelists, maybe take about a minute. Sister Eva has a question for you all.
Thank you, Arnulfo. I'd like to know if there is one thing that we as Local 2015 can do to bring about environmental justice, and what would you do?
Okay. Well, I know what this local can do when it gets its back behind an issue. I was with you guys on the Fight for 15. I know that when you organize, you can make things happen. And I look at this fall, and I know it's going to be a question of who shows up at the polls. And if we're organized and we get ourselves together and we get our communities out to the polls, then we're going to get environmental justice, we're going to get economic justice, we're going to get what we deserve, we're going to get justice. And if we don't, then we're not. So from my point of view, Eva, if you ask me one thing, it's that we organize politically this fall to make sure that those people on TV who sound so scary and so terrible do not win.
Does that sound like something we can do, SEIU 2015? All right. Dr. Pastor, could you briefly answer Eva's?
I want to echo Tom and add one thing. I want you to remember that the same people who are denying that climate change is real are saying that immigrants take jobs and cause crime that our Muslim brothers and sisters should not be welcomed in this country, and that inequality is somehow good for the economy. The package of lies that has been put together needs to be resisted at the polls, and it needs to be seen as the part of a fabric of one big lie about who we are and who we can be, and we need to create another alternative. Part of that is mobilizing for the polls, but part of it is something that our sister said, which is being in solidarity with one another. We need to also show up around these environmental issues and to figure out what works for SEIU 2015 to find its route into doing that, and then to demand that environmentalists, not all of whom get the economic justice issues in the way that Tom does, also come on board on economic justice issues so that we realize that the fight for a fossil-free future and the fight for 15 are part of the same fight around dignity and human worth.
What they said. So I think absolutely being engaged, actually being engaged in politics and in your community is actually good for your health. It gives you a sense of control. There's some emerging research on that, so I invite you to become involved. I know you're going to, because that's who you are. If you want to get involved in Los Angeles, I urge you to come with us to work to protect the communities of South LA from oil drilling. Go to Stand LA, you can join, you can tell us what you want to do with us, and again, stand in solidarity with us. If you're in the Central Valley, there's groups that are going to be working to protect school children from exposure to pesticides. Be in solidarity, as we will be in solidarity with you. So there's plenty to do, and we should be doing it together.
Great, thank you, Dr. Pastor, and thank you, Martha. So what we'd like to now do is open it up to you. What questions do you have for our panelists today about how we work together? So why don't we do this? I think we started from the front. Let's go to the back microphones and see if we have any questions. I see a question.
Good afternoon. I would like each one of the panelists to address my question. Inasmuch as the environmental violations that take place happen at the hands of big corporations, and those corporations have board of directors that are more interested in profit than being a good neighbor, and the shareholders often are not American citizens, but the board of directors takes the profits offshores and they don't pay taxes here, yet they pollute this land. That's the environmental side. I want to know about the justice side, putting those corporations into receivership. Specifically, the children that drank the water in Flint, Michigan will be ruined for the rest of their lives, and the shareholders should not receive a penny until those children have gone on and lived 85, 95, or 100 years. Then the profits can go back to those shareholders. But the profit and that corporation should be put in receivership and take care of that entire city for the rest of their lives. What do you think of that idea? And the same applies to Porter Ranch and every other environmentally violated location on in this country.
Thank you, and I think I recognize that voice, but it's far away from here. Could you just say your name and where you work?
My name is Louis James. I'm a care provider in Los Angeles, California.
Great, thank you, Louis.
You want me to go first? So thank you very much for that question, because there is something wrong in our corporate structure. Somehow, corporations have decided that their only responsibility is to their bottom line, that they don't have responsibilities for their workers are not partners, they don't have responsibilities for their communities, and in this case, they knowingly will take risks with other people's health that can affect their entire life and shorten their entire life. So let me say that any system like that is just wrong, and there is no way. I don't think money is enough, actually. You're asking that the money that they would make has got to go to pay back the people who've been harmed, and I would agree with you on that. That if you're going to knowingly harm people, you have got to pay them back for as long as it takes. But I think there's a different question here, and that is, if you willingly and knowingly harm someone physically like that, or harm thousands of people physically, I ask you, is that not a criminal violation?
Corporations are people.
And I don't think we're going to get different behavior when people think that there is absolute immunity from that. I think if you're talking about ruining someone's health, shortening their life, that is something that of course should be paid back from a monetary standpoint, but I think on a moral standpoint, it goes beyond money. And until people feel worried about that, they are not going to change their behavior in the way that has to happen. Flint is not an anomaly. This is going on in our society, and we have to change people's attitudes about their responsibility to their communities and the people who work for them and how they think more broadly about their role in society.
Thank
Great,
you. Our
thank
other two
you.
panelists.
Would you all like to respond to that question, or should we move on to the next?
Well, I'll just say just a couple things very quickly.
Sure.
One is, I would love to see the reality TV show about after they're serving time in prison for that crime. That would be really... But I do want to point out something, which is, and Marta will recall, during the campaign against Prop 23, which was a proposition that wanted to overturn California's commitment to reducing greenhouse gas emissions, it was funded by two out-of-state oil companies, Valero and Tesoro. And in the middle of that campaign, we calculated something, which was a racial disparity index for the exposures that any particular company in California was causing. And Valero and Tesoro were among the top 5 in terms of how racially disparate their impacts were on communities of color, something that helped to animate communities of color to be part of this. And so one thing I would refer you to is there's a website called the Toxic 100, which ranks the Fortune 500 companies in the United States by how much toxicity they put into the environment and how racially disparate they are. And I think that that can actually be a very good organizing tool if you want to run a campaign.
Great, thank you, Dr. Pastor.
So
Marta,
I
quickly.
also want to say, we made it a crime in California to disturb lead-based paint in a house. But we cannot shut down Exide, a battery recycler that has poisoned children with lead, there's no safe level for generations. So not only do we have a corporate system that's broken, but we have a regulatory system that is captured by those industries and does not do their job. So we also have to organize and make government actually protect us, because they're failing at that. And the other part I want to say is, where's your money invested, SEIU? You can change corporate behavior by changing where you invest your money. So we encourage you to do there's lots of groups that are doing just that, working with stockholders and doing stockholder resolutions. Because if we're going to change corporate behavior, we start with their boards and who holds their stock. And often, public unions and unions have a lot of that money, and you can change their course.
Great, thank you, Marta. Let's go to our second question here in the middle back.
Hello, my name is Rick Linder. I'm from Long Beach. I'm a in-home care worker. I'm a retired journeyman steam fitter and retired plumber. I've worked in every refinery in LA. I've built 3 nuclear plants. I'm quite familiar with heavy industrial safety and pollution. With proper engineering controls, safety and environment can be protected, but that may not meet the construction company or client's bottom line. But it is within the capacity of labor to do this. I built 3 desaltation plants in my career, and they say there's a shortage of water, but I guess they haven't noticed there's lots of water in the ocean. But there's 250,000 unemployed plumbers and pipe fitters, can't get jobs because they're overqualified, but they could be replacing the broken piping systems in the street, desaltation plants from the ocean. Now they're going to price gouge you on water just like they price gouged you for gasoline. When I worked in the refinery, I paid 27 cents a gallon to fill up my gas tank, when across the street it was $4 a gallon. So we're going to get price gouged for water just like we were price gouged for gasoline. And it's within the capacity of labor to alleviate this problem, improve the environment, and do things in a safe, responsible manner. But it may not necessarily meet the stockholders' interest.
So let me say that's great intervention.
Great, thank you.
Let me say one thing about that. I bet Tom would have something to add to it for sure, which is that there's huge economic opportunity in this climate challenge. We need to make sure that our refineries are not emitting as they have in the past. We have to make sure that we're dealing with issues of climate resilience for places that might see seawater rise. We have to have a massive tree planting campaign to prevent deaths from heat waves in areas that are tree poor, like South Los Angeles. We have to shift to renewable energies, which is going to require all sorts of development of new industries, all sorts of installation of rooftop solar panels. There is a world of work out there. And if we wind up actually pushing hard on some of this climate change stuff that needs to happen, we can actually generate employment for a lot of people who've been left out.
Great, thank you, Dr. Pastor. Let's go to one more question. I wanted to remind everyone, if we're not able to get to your question now, you may also submit them via email through our app. You just go to the communication menu on the app and select Contact Us to access the email option. That way we can ensure that everyone's question get answered. Let's go to the far back left.
Yes, my name is Gilbert Miles, and I'm from Fresno, and I was wanting to question the panel in regards to environmental factors, since we know that corporations normally use our facilities or our communities as dumping grounds. And this has to tie into with the criminal aspect of it, that if in fact they are committing a criminal act, what are the legal steps that a community like in Kettleman City, California, where the kids are being born with mental retardation and other abnormalities, how can we as an organization support a community of immigrants or migrants that don't have a voice?
Thank you, Gilbert.
Can I talk about that for a sec? Because my wife and I last year drove up and down the Central Valley, and we were looking at air and water quality issues, and we were looking particularly at Fresno, and we were looking at communities where the air was terrible and toxic, but the water was also toxic, and the level of cancer was unbelievable. And my wife said, we live in San Francisco, and my wife said, we're moving to Fresno to work on this problem. This problem is unbearable to see this year in California, with California citizens undergoing this and seeing how sick the people are and the fact that it goes on and nothing's being done about it. But let me tell you, I have a strong feeling about this, and it's why I am so involved politically and why I'm urging you guys to be involved politically. I also went to Stockton this year, and I talked to people in the United Farm Workers. And the farm workers have conditions that actually shocked me, because until last year, 2015, it was not illegal to expose them to dangerous chemicals that could make them blind or kill them. It wasn't illegal. They had rules in the field where they didn't have to have water for people who were picking in 110 degrees, 115 degrees temperatures. It seemed they were not subject to Cal OSHA. They had no protection. And when I look at the communities in Fresno, and when I look at the people working in the fields in Stockton, I ask myself, how is that possible? In 2015 or 2016, in the most progressive state in the United States of America. And the answer is we have to be politically represented. We have to step up for ourselves, and we have to have people who see every human being as worth the same respect and protection. And until we have that, we will be trying to get justice for something that's gone wrong. But when something's gone wrong and there's a sick kid, that's too late. We have to change the conditions and make sure that that doesn't happen, so those kids have full lives and so people live their full life and get the opportunities that they deserve. And that's what we have to push for.
Yeah. So,
Great. Yes, Martha?
so the reason this happens, and we all think that somebody's minding the store, that somehow our environmental laws were meant to protect our health. That's not what they were developed for. They're there to give industry the rules of the game. They manage risk, not prevent exposure. And that's why we need to be involved politically and actually change these laws so that we're actually preventing harm. There was a scientist at the Department of Toxic Substances. There was an internal report, and a whistleblower, and he said, if we lose one job, that is enough for us to stop a regulation. So the value that they place on one job is more that they value on a human life. That's what we have to change, exactly what Tom said. And that's reflected in laws that don't protect people. They protect businesses. They tell you, this is an acceptable level of risk, but that risk on our lives is not an acceptable level of risk. And that's what we have to change.
Great. Thank you, Martha. What do we think, 2015? Is this an issue that we can work on? Is this an issue where we can get organized and politically active?
Can't hear you.
So what I'd like to do now is just ask our panelists to please stand up. We just want to really thank you for joining us here today, and also thank Sister Eva for joining us. I also wanted to recognize Lupe Martinez, who's here with us today, who is a longtime activist and leader on this issue. He's the Assistant Executive Director of the Center for Race, Poverty, and the Environment, who's here with us today as well. And let's give a big warm welcome and thank the panelists for joining us here today.
Thank you. Totally fine.